How a Dictator Actually Built Singapore. Introduction. The Paradox of Singapore. Singapore is one of the richest, cleanest, safest, and most efficient countries in the world. It has no natural resources, no farmland, no oil, no large population. Yet its citizens enjoy higher incomes than most Europeans, better public housing than many Americans, and lower corruption than almost anywhere on earth. So how did this happen? The answer almost always leads to one man, Lee Kuan Yew. To his supporters, Lee Kuan Yew was a visionary nation builder. To his critics, he was an authoritarian ruler who crushed opposition, controlled the press, and ruled with an iron fist. Both are true. Singapore was not built by liberal democracy. It was built by discipline, fear, long-term planning, and absolute political control. This is the story of how a so-called dictator built a first-world country from nothing, and the uncomfortable lessons that come with it. Part 1. Singapore before Lee Kuan Yew, a place nobody wanted. In the early 1960s, Singapore was not impressive. It was a poor port city, crowded slums, high unemployment, ethnic tensions, no future. The British were leaving. Malaysia didn't really want Singapore. The world didn't care. Many experts believed Singapore would fail. Lee Kuan Yew himself later admitted, "I thought it might take 25 years to make Singapore a decent place. I didn't even know if we would survive." Survival, not democracy, was the goal. Part 2. Lee Kuan Yew's core belief, order before freedom. Western democracies are built on one assumption. Freedom creates prosperity. Lee Kuan Yew believed the opposite. Order creates prosperity. He believed, poor countries cannot afford chaos. Free speech can wait. Stability must come first. Economic growth is more important than political debate. This belief shaped everything. Singapore would not be built through compromise. It would be built through control. Part 3. Crushing opposition. Politics without mercy. Lee Kuan Yew did not rule like a gentle reformer. He ruled like a man who believed failure meant national death. Opposition leaders were arrested under security laws, bankrupted through lawsuits, silenced through media restrictions. The Internal Security Act allowed detention without trial. Critics called it tyranny. Lee's response was blunt. If you want freedom of speech, go to another country. To him, political instability equals economic collapse. Opposition equals potential chaos. Chaos equals national suicide. Singapore became a one-party dominant state. Elections existed, but losing was almost impossible for the ruling party. Part 4. Controlling the press. One voice, one direction. In Singapore, the press was never free in the Western sense. Newspapers were regulated, licensed, closely monitored. Journalists learned quickly. Criticize corruption? Allowed. Question leadership legitimacy? Dangerous. Lee believed, the press must serve the nation, not undermine it. This ensured no panic, no populism, no misinformation as defined by the state. The cost? No investigative journalism against the government. No public debate on leadership. The benefit? Absolute message discipline. Long-term policy continuity. Part 5. Zero tolerance for corruption. Fear as a tool. Here is where Lee Kuan Yew was ruthless, but effective. Corruption was treated like treason. It did not matter who you were, how powerful, how connected. Caught. You went to jail. You lost everything. Your family's reputation was destroyed. Ministers were paid very high salaries. Critics complained. Lee responded, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. The logic was simple. High pay removes temptation. Severe punishment removes risk. The result? Singapore became one of the least corrupt nations on earth. Part 6. Engineering society, not just governing it. Lee Kuan Yew didn't just run a government. He engineered a society. Housing. Over 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built apartments. What? Prevent slums. Force ethnic integration. Create asset ownership. Each housing block had racial quotas, shared spaces, strict rules. This prevented ghettos, ethnic riots, political radicalization. Education. Education was not about creativity at first. It was about discipline and usefulness. English as main language. Math, science, engineering prioritized. Vocational skills respected. The goal. Produce workers investors want. Part 7. Harsh laws, safe streets. Singapore is famous for its strict laws. Caning. Heavy fines. Drug death penalty. Public behavior rules. Western critics call it brutal. Singaporeans call it safe. Lee believed, A little injustice to the criminal is justice for society. Crime dropped. Streets became safe. Foreign investors felt secure. Fear worked. Part 8. Economic strategy, pragmatism over ideology. Lee Kuan Yew hated ideology. Capitalist? Socialist? He didn't care. He asked one question. Does it work? Singapore welcomed foreign companies, protected property rights, kept unions weak, focused on exports. Workers didn't strike. Wages grew slowly, but jobs were stable. The government acted like CEO, not a political party. Every policy was measured by results. Part 9. Sacrificing democracy for time. Democracy is slow. Debates, protests, compromises. Lee believed Singapore didn't have time, so he traded political freedom for consistency, long-term planning. 50-year plans were possible because leadership didn't change every election. This created infrastructure excellence, policy stability, investor confidence. But it also created fear of dissent, political apathy, intellectual conformity. Part 10. The moral question. Was it worth it? This is the uncomfortable part. Singapore works. But at what cost? No free press, limited opposition, fear of speaking openly, social conformity. Yet, citizens are wealthy, streets are safe, institutions function, corruption is rare. Lee Kuan Yew once said, "I do not believe that democracy necessarily leads to development." History proved him right, in Singapore, but also proved something else. This model is extremely hard to copy. Part 11. Why this model fails elsewhere. Many dictators tried to copy Singapore. Most failed. Why? Because Lee Kuan Yew had personal discipline, long-term vision, zero tolerance for corruption, merit-based governance. Most dictators want power, wealth, loyalty. Singapore worked not because of dictatorship, but because of competent authoritarianism. That combination is rare. Part 12. The legacy, a golden cage? Modern Singaporeans live in a paradox. They are free to travel, free to earn, free to consume, but cautious to criticize, organize, challenge power. The system works, but it also conditions obedience. The question now is, can Singapore remain successful without fear? Lee Kuan Yew built the machine, but machines age. Conclusion. The truth about Singapore. Singapore was not built by kindness. It was built by fear, discipline, control, ruthless pragmatism. Lee Kuan Yew was not a saint. He was not a monster. He was something more dangerous. A leader who was right often enough to justify absolute power. Singapore proves a hard truth. Freedom is not the only path to prosperity, but it is the safest one long-term. The city-state stands as a warning and a lesson. Order can build wealth, but only wisdom can sustain it.